As soon as a part is released, it's moved into the Datum library of parts, and that library is then used to select against from a procurement perspective. Anytime a new part's released, anytime a part's revised, those new parts and all the sort of metadata or information related to that part is automatically synced into Datum for the supply chain team to access. Importantly, we don't view ourselves as the source of truth for parts. That definitely is a Duro, and so effectively mirroring an existing bill of materials from Duro and just making it more structured in a way that is easy for the supply chain process and our workflow around a specific part. A request queue. This is just really the list of new purchase requisitions, and typically that's an engineer or a buyer, or excuse me, the demander, but an engineer kind of communicating to the supply chain team about parts that need to be purchased, requirements around those parts, timelines, etc. Kind of looks like. So I already set it up where this is a requisition. It's got some information labeled against it around kind of the group and product this is sort of tied to. We've got some requirements around quality requirements. And then importantly, I've got my list of parts that are sort of roll up into this small kind of valve assembly. I'm a supply chain user right now. So I am the person responsible for taking this request and going to source against it with our approved vendor list process. However, I'm noticing that there's this open change order flagged on this valve, and I need to find out a little bit more whether or not I can actually start my sourcing process, or do I need to wait until this particular part is re-released, or is this version. I just need to find out more information why there might be a modification for the information of this part, and the files with this part may not be up to date. So kind of just sort of added this in as like a nice little UX element is I can actually just, from Duro, we're mapping over the URL to this part page, and I can just click directly to go specifically to where this part information originated in Duro, and I can see, what is the update. And it looks like there's a third revision of a file. It looks like that's probably what the change order is for. Yeah, there's a revision there's a change order requested for a revision. I can just see more detail. There could be a material change to the part before you start the sourcing process, and really more importantly, before that part gets on order, where we're trying to prevent that kind of risk of sort of buying the wrong revision of a part. So I'm going to go ahead and approve this and just show you how that looks like downstream on our end. Okay, so that part's been approved. I will flip back up over to Datum and sort of show you what should have occurred. Maybe take a couple seconds, but I'll show you what that looks like on the Datum side. Okay, you'll see that this part's now inactive, which is super important from our perspective because now there's been a new version of the part. In this case, there's a version 3 out there, and we want to really clearly indicate to the supply chain team that version 2 is really essentially obsolete. Doesn't mean it can't be sourced against, but it does mean for this particular purpose, it is really there is a subsequent part revision that I should be referencing. So I'm going to go pull that now and show you what that looks like. Okay, so I'm going to go find version 3 of this part and see what's going on with this particular part. Let's search against that. I've got part 471001. Okay, so I see that this has got a version 3 now with no inactive flag. Version 1 and version 2 are inactive. So I'm getting the visual indication that, okay, here I'm going to select that because that's what I actually want to buy. I'm going to remove version 2 before I start that process. And now I've got the kind of latest and greatest assembly here with all piece parts up to date with no open change orders. So I'll show you what that sourcing process looks like. So I'll just say I know I'm going to go to Vocus Dynamics here in this case. I actually want to start an RFQ and send them all 4 parts so they can quote against. And through our supplier portal, you can do that pretty quickly. All the parts and files that were in the request from the engineer to the supply chain team are now in the queue for the supply chain team to communicate to our supplier. The same information, I've got kind of part details. I can still jump back to that part page if I want to. I can look at the files. In this case, there's some files here. And I can pull all that information and send that over to the supplier. In this case, we'll do 2 and add that on the request. Yeah, so that is the sort of the workflow, if you will. I can, obviously add my note to the supplier. Just, please quote these parts ASAP, and go ahead and send that off to my supplier. They will get an email notification with a link to the supplier side of this RFQ, where they can, again, access these parts, access this part information, access the information around the line item, quantity, need date, etc. And then, we can communicate, kind of through the platform or share other documentation. So ultimately, this Duro integration is really a workflow from a supply chain perspective to interact downstream with the suppliers themselves through the platform, or having to download files, out ever having to worry about kind of part numbering, kind of double checking part numbers and revisions, and just trying to automate most of this process kind of as much as possible and limit errors. So hopefully this is helpful. Definitely other aspects to this integration, I'd say this is kind of the key piece of it. But again, the main one being, if there is an update to that part in Duro, it's immediately reflected in Datum. And if there is a kind of an update in process in Duro, it's also reflected in Datum. So again, reducing the risk of the supply chain team being out of sequence with the engineering team, and ultimately preventing buying the wrong parts. So I hope this is helpful.